folks. Welcome to the Atheist Experience. This show is brought to you by the atheist community of Austin. I'm your guest host, Jeff Dee, sitting in for Ray Blevins, who's taking the month off. And my guest co-host today is my wife, Manda. And today's guest is Susan Brown, co-chair of the Atheist Community of Austin. The Atheist Community of Austin is a non-profit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of the church and state. We have weekly meetings Sunday mornings at the Hot Jumbo Bagelry, 307 West 5th at 10:30 a.m. right after the show. Every Sunday morning, except for the first Sunday of each month when we have our lecture series at Fur's Cafeteria at North Cross Mall. The next lecture will take place on August 1st, and the speakers will be Bob Jensen and Rahul Mahajan of UT, who will be talking about the joys and not so much joys of dealing with theists. On the second Sunday of each month at noon, right after our regular meeting, we have the Board of Directors meeting, the board meeting, where we conduct our official group business. All ACA members are welcome to attend, but you can only vote if you're on the Board of Directors. I also want to mention that those of you who shop at Randall's can give them our number, 5158, and then 1% of your purchases will be donated to the Atheist Community of Austin. Well, that's the official business. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
This is awesome. We got like bunches of women on the show today, which is it's always a problem. We have quite a few female members of the ACA, but a lot of them don't seem to be that interested in getting up here where things get a little confrontational. So do you have any stuff you wanted to talk about particularly, or we just want to sit in and answer calls?
Answer calls. We do have one event for atheists and people who are interested and maybe can't make it to our Sunday meetings.
Do a headshot on her.
We meet Thursdays around 6 o'clock at Schultz Gardens for happy hour, and that's on San Jacinto around 16th Street.
And did you do that again this last week? I know I missed
Yeah,
the
we've
first
done
one.
it.
I've missed the second one too then.
Yeah, so we'll have the third one this week.
How many people attended the second time?
About 6 to 8, I think.
Yeah,
Not as many.
a little smaller than first time. We'll have to push that. Great. Gosh, what else can we do? We can jump into news. I wanted to introduce a new segment to the show called Old Business, because I've noticed that on several occasions we've had callers who brought up some wild claim or other, or had a question that we couldn't answer, and we said, oh yes, we'll look into it and get back to you next week. And all too often we just forget because we have real lives, and the rest of the week is not taken up just thinking about what we need to do for the TV show. And some of that stuff gets lost, but I don't want that to happen anymore. So last week, a caller claimed that human beings have no biological or psychological need for sleep, referring to a story about a woman in England who gets by on only 2 hours of sleep at night. The caller was unable to provide us with any supporting references, and I said we'd look into it. Well, after an intensive search of the internet, I failed to uncover even one reference to this woman or any documentation supporting the caller's claim. All that I turned up was report after report on the negative effects of sleep deprivation and sleeping disorders, all of which tends to indicate that human beings in fact do need sleep, and science stories on the biological mechanisms behind sleep. Caller, if you're listening, please get back to us if you can support your claim with references. Until then, we'll have to label that particular extraordinary claim unworthy of belief on the grounds of lack of evidence. Do you have anything you want to get into? Else I'll roll right into news.
No, we have a crew of about 9 people here. You don't see the people behind the camera. And this is all volunteer, of course. And thank you to everybody who got up on a Sunday morning to come all the way this way from wherever you were in Austin.
And these same people get up pretty much every Sunday morning, which is quite a
So if anybody out there has an interest in television and you're an atheist and you want to see how the show is made, you might come on down to the studio.
Yeah, we can always use extra hands.
Call our number. What's the
The number for our voicemail, where you can ask questions about the ACA organization or about our TV show, is 371-2911. We're also live, by the way. This is July 25th, and we'll take your calls at 472-2255. We also have a website, which is, if I recall correctly, www.atheist-community.org. Yes, I was right. My memory actually held up that time.
You got enough sleep.
I got enough sleep. Well, let's go into news. Found a bunch of interesting little tidbits this past week. New Star Wars film offends Mexican Catholics. Mexican Roman Catholics are offended by the new Star Wars movie, with which one church publication with one church publication saying The Phantom Menace, which opened just 2 weeks ago in Mexico, parodies the Holy Scriptures and promotes a New Age culture that Catholics should oppose. The movie's own version of a virgin birth appears to be the church's gravest concern, while it does not help that young Anakin Skywalker is likened to a savior, and that the Force seems to them like a science fiction ripoff of the Holy Spirit. Man sentenced for forced marriage to niece, Salt Lake City. A man who took his underage niece as his 15th wife was sentenced Friday to up to 10 years in prison, prosecutors said. David Ortel Kingston, 33, was convicted in June by a jury of incest and unlawful sexual conduct with his niece, now aged 17. She testified that she was forced in 1997 by her father and uncle to become the uncle's 15th wife. Kingston, who has been in custody, was sentenced to up to 5 years for each count to run consecutively, Richard Shepard of the Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office said. The case came to light after the teenager contacted police to tell them she had run away from her uncle and had been beaten by her father, John Kingston, a Mormon. Bible sales beyond graves spark police raid. London. British police are investigating a Christian bookshop that is sending bills to dead people for Bibles, trading standards officers said Wednesday. Chris Tinley, a trading standards manager in southern England, said the company had sent invoices to people who had recently died, demanding payment for Bibles and a book called Jesus of the Holy Land. And now, this is my favorite story of the week, nuns with guns. Bogota, 2 Roman Catholic nuns shot and killed a thief who broke into their sanctuary in central Colombia, authorities said on Saturday. I think we heard some gunshots. That's in excellently poor taste, Arlo, thank you. The sharpshooting nuns, who have not been named, blasted the intruder in the head with a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver after they heard strange noises in the corridors of the Sanctuary of the Virgin of Miracles, patron saint of aviators. Police said the fatal shooting occurred on Wednesday night at the cloister in the city of Tunja, but only gave details on Saturday after releasing the 2 nuns on bail. A police spokesman in Tunja said nuns at the Sanctuary of the Virgin of Miracles began nighttime patrols early this year, following 7 previous break-ins during which chickens and some religious relics were stolen. Yeah, gotta shoot them intruders who might make off with your chickens or religious relics. Local military... I don't know how you do it, Arlo. Local military commanders had given the nuns the revolver together with the relevant gun license so that they could protect themselves from potential attack. And of course, there are no more details to the story. It could be that they were being menaced by a guy with a weapon and they were defending themselves, and it could be completely justified. But I'm wondering in all this where the turn the other cheek thing went. We got any callers yet? Nothing.
Call in.
We got a little...
Say hello.
I can keep doing news for quite a while. It was a busy week. The Statesman had an article, FBI seeks fate of coins linked to O'Hare. This story is getting so weird that I'm pretty convinced we're eventually going to have a movie of the week. Apparently, the current theory is that the killer or killers actually kidnapped Madalyn Murray O'Hare and her daughter and then used them to blackmail the son, John, into taking thousands of dollars in gold coins and putting them in a storage unit somewhere. And that between the time that the coins were dropped off and the time that the murderers came to get the coins, some completely unrelated thieves broke into the storage unit and made off with them. And so they're trying to track these things down. The story here in the paper said that they had captured the thieves and recovered or traced where some of the money went, but they were still looking for $80,000 of it. And this might explain why some of the killers killed some of the other killers or conspirators, because they might have been at each other's throats after the money disappeared mysteriously. But boy, it's just getting crazier and crazier. I just hope that eventually the complete and accurate story comes out. Also, reminds me, we got a call now. We'll get to it. This has been in the news. Okay, for those atheists out there who think that the right way to stop people from having goofy religious beliefs is to round them up and detain them. Not that I've ever met an atheist who thought that, but just in case some of you are out there, the kind of atheists that Christians are afraid of, there's this story, China arrests leaders of sect. There's a Buddhist group that has been protesting the Chinese government, and the Chinese government responded first by launching a media blitz blasting superstitious beliefs, and then when that didn't work, they started rounding up the Buddhists. Wrong, 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 wrong. This never works. This is not the way to educate people and get them thinking rationally, is to round them up. Not that I'm saying that opposing the Chinese government is necessarily irrational, but they're using the Buddhism as an excuse to claim that. The way to get people to abandon their superstitions is teach them what happens to be, better ways of thinking about stuff, not rounding them up and forcing them to be rational. That just doesn't work. Should we take this? Oh, we lost that one call. Darn. Call back. We'll take the call.
Jan. Tell Jan to call back.
Oh, Jan.
Jan.
Call back.
Jan, call back.
Please.
A couple of magazines came out this past week that had relevant stories. I'm not going to go deeply into these because I haven't had a chance to prepare anything, but Free Inquiry, which is the magazine of the Council for Secular Humanism. There we go. The Science of Religion, they go into claims that there are biological impulses that get people to believe religious stuff. They go into sociological reasons why people would believe religious claims without there being any hard evidence. There's an interview with George Carlin, the comedian, talking about his atheism. And Alan Dershowitz, why is this name familiar?
He's a lawyer.
Who has he defended? Was he has been in the news recently?
Was he in the OJ?
Was he an OJ defender? Well, okay. We'll take credit for him anyway. Taking Disbelief Out of the Closet is an article by him. He is an atheist and arguing very persuasively, I thought, but you can find the magazine and read it yourself, that it's just wrong that there is this pervasive attitude in the country that if you're not religious, you're automatically a bad person. Then I've got the latest edition of Scientific American, which has a story called How Children Learn Morality, in response to all of the recent claims that the school shootings and so forth are due to lack of Christianity in schools. This talks about the aspects of morality that are in fact instinctive, that children have automatically. It talks about the normal development sequence that children go through, learning what kinds of behaviors work and what kinds don't. And it dissects the whole thing and never once finds any indication that reading a holy book or being told hard rules by your religious leaders are going to make you a more moral person. And we got that call back. Let's, is that Jan? They're getting the info.
While they're doing that, can I recommend something atheists might find interesting on television tonight?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to do with atheism, but I think most atheists would get a kick out of it because it's on the E channel, E Entertainment, and it's at 7 o'clock tonight. and it's about all these religions that a lot of these celebrities get mixed up in. It looks very interesting. And
right,
of course,
religion in Hollywood. I saw that story announced. Yeah.
Yeah, it's mostly going to be Scientology, I'm sure. However, they're going to go into all kinds of other spiritual thingies, which might be neat.
I'd be very impressed if they did a big show like focusing on Scientology and being critical of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we have Marsha on one. Hello, Marsha.
Hello.
Hi, what can we do for you?
Yeah, what are you all about?
We're atheists.
I know, it means you don't believe in God,
That's
right?
correct.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess what I was wondering is if you don't believe in God, why do you have groups to talk against it?
Well, that would be because the vast majority of people in our culture do believe, and along with believing in God, they have a tendency to believe that if you don't believe in God, that makes you a bad person. And so we need support. We need to be able to hang out with other people who aren't judgmental of us like that, and feel better about ourselves.
Okay, I agree with that. I don't think anybody is bad for not believing in God. It just makes me, I've been very curious because I've watched your show a few times, and it just seems like, I understand the rule factor, organized religion, but it's the whole idea that, I mean, do you think believing in God is bad?
Me personally?
Well, I mean,
we'd all like to answer that question, I bet.
Well, the atheist group, I mean, to believe
we do not make it our business to tell other people what they ought to believe.
Right.
But we do have an opinion about whether that is healthy or good, and generally I think it boils down to, well, believing in stuff for which there is no evidence tends to be bad policy, and so at the very least, most atheists would agree that to that extent it's a mistake. Then let me pass the question on to let's start with our guest and then...
Evidence. It is all about evidence with atheists, right?
Well, sure.
So do you believe in Jesus? That he existed?
Some of us do, some of us don't. I haven't seen compelling evidence.
I haven't. Nothing that would convince me.
And, in the presence of evidence, which we have tons of, that characters have been made up by people and believed in, because we have, even if Christianity was completely accurate, we have all the other religions then which would automatically be not accurate as evidence that people do make up characters and talk about them as if they actually existed. Since people do that, and since there's no really solid evidence that he actually existed, it seems a safe bet to assume that he didn't.
Okay. Well, the things that are taught about this person is just, it's all been good from what I've heard. That all he taught was, to love those that are judged and to love those that are poor and are. I mean, it's all such a good thing that even if it was made up, according to many people's beliefs, it doesn't seem like it would be such a. It's hard for me to put this into words.
No, I understand what you're getting at. Is anybody jump in if you want to respond to these things? Otherwise, I'll just keep talking.
No, we have pretty harsh condemnations by Jesus. The idea that Jesus never said anything bad about anybody. In the New Testament, we have Jesus saying, do horrible things to the people who don't believe in God.
Yeah,
do horrible things to the people who don't believe in me.
Before me with a sword is the exact words that Jesus is supposed to have said.
Also to hate your families.
To
Hate your family, that's a good one.
It's supposed to be taken metaphorically, but...
How is that? What did he mean by that?
I don't know.
He said to hate your family?
Yeah. If you don't hate your family, you can't be a true follower of me, I think is what he said. And probably there's room for interpretation there. But we don't need to get into specifics here. I think the point is that you'll find atheists who will disagree that everything that Jesus said is necessarily good. And furthermore, we don't reject all of the ideas that happen to have also been attributed to Jesus just because they're attributed to a character that we don't believe in. Mm-hmm. To the extent that anything that Jesus is supposed to have said is good, well, we agree with those things. Right. And we would point to philosophies that existed before Jesus' time which said roughly the same thing, and say, well, if one kind of behavior is bad, then it's bad in general. It doesn't take some holy figure to tell us that. That's something we can figure out for ourselves.
Okay.
Right? So we do not, as many Christians want to accuse us of, we do not reject Jesus and then turn around and have no morality whatsoever, or disagree 100% with all things that are supposed to be teachings of Christianity. We just don't believe them because Christ is supposed to have said them. We believe them if we believe them, because we've thought about them and decided that, yeah, that does make sense.
Okay. Sometimes I have so many questions, and then I call up and I'm blank. But
oh, these were good questions.
I've recently started attending church, and it's just a feeling of so much love. It just kind of, I don't know. I didn't feel any. I've personally never met anybody that because you didn't believe in God, they thought you were a bad person. I'm not saying you. I mean, apparently you all have, but I've never met.
A lot of us have.
Yeah.
If you've watched the show, you've heard from these people, because we get them as callers.
Well, yes, I do. I do hear people that call up with these judgments and frustrations, and I don't think that's right either. Because if you do believe in God and Jesus, and then you believe that everyone has free will, and that you have the perfect right to choose what you want to believe, and that if they judge you, then they're not really following God. And well, that's my opinion.
Marsha, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
How do you find a way to not believe in something, for example, UFO stories or Bigfoot, unless you do happen to believe in those? Where do you draw the line at the things to not believe in? I mean, aside from things that you feel are good things to believe because they're virtuous things, how do you decide what's nonsense?
Personally, I'm really confused because I have a very open mind. So because I would think it would be a little crazy to think we're the only living things in the universe. And as far as the unexplained, well, I'm not one to say, well, that's not true because I haven't seen the evidence personally. I mean that with many things. I mean, everything. Whether it be ghosts or, any kind of thing that is unexplained. I don't think I have the right to say that it does or doesn't exist. I don't know if that's what you're asking. I don't know. I'm still kind of tired.
Well, good morning.
I'm
Welcome
still
to
waking
Sunday.
up. But do you believe in aliens?
No, I haven't seen evidence. I hope there's aliens. I think it's a wonderful idea that we're not alone. I think lots of people feel that way.
If I could make a comment here on this very subject, there's a great quote from Carl Sagan, who believed that there is other life out there in the universe, but did not believe that any of it had ever come visit us in spaceships. On the subject of open minds, he said, "It's good to have an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out." and so he proceeded in his book, The Demon Haunted World, which is subtitled Science as a Candle in the Dark, that there are sensible ways to think about things that can help you resolve not necessarily whether, say, ghosts really exist, but whether you ought to believe in them, whether there's justification to actively believe in such things. So
I see.
that's.
I mean, so much. Okay.
Right.
So I've listened to, was it Lutherans that believe that the Earth, or there's no carbon dating. Carbon dating isn't true. Have you heard that? That Lutherans believe that?
Yeah, that's a common claim among people that are creationists. I didn't know that it was limited to a particular.
Oh, well, I haven't heard that from any other group personally. That's why. But it really blew me away because the Earth seems, I don't know, evidence. The dinosaurs, that's evidence.
Yeah.
It just, there's so many things that don't have evidence that seem to be true.
Yeah. And, I think what most atheists would say, and again, I'm speaking for most atheists, and I wish you guys would jump in and comment, but most atheists would say the time to believe something is after the evidence is in and not before. And in our opinion, the problem with theism is that it's belief before there is, in fact, evidence.
Okay. Something happened to me when my grandmother passed away. I was looking at her in the coffin, and she raised me. She was very, very important to me, and I just saw this shell. It seemed like all this energy that was her had left, and it just didn't seem like, everything that makes up a human being, an individual, would just melt away and be nothing. It just seems like there's a bigger scheme to things. The way the earth is, the everything. I mean, everything is so incredible. It's so miraculous to think that all this came from two blobs smashing into each other, and all of a sudden we have cable. I don't know.
Well, that's a bit of a leap.
Do you ever think about that? I mean, is that we started from an amoeba or something? I mean, all of a sudden
I think about that every day of my life. And we're made up of building blocks. We're made up of carbon. When that's pure, you get a diamond. We're made of hydrogen. It's a gas you can see through, and it explodes. We're made of oxygen. That's another gas that'll explode. If you put hydrogen and oxygen together, you get water. It's not very much like either of its two components, but it's something different. You put your carbon, your hydrogen, and your oxygen together, and you get something that could be a sugar. Carbohydrates, it's carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And now so far I'm up to 3 building blocks. There's nitrogen. This is a mostly nothing gas. It's inert. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't explode. And it makes up 70% of our atmosphere right now. But bacteria can work on it and fix it, meaning they stick it to other molecules or they stick it to other elements. And together, that fixed nitrogen with carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen makes what they call the building blocks of life. Most of your physical body is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. We have a perspective that these building blocks are like, when you go to school, you see those little tinker toys that you stick together. This is not a very accurate mental image of what molecules are like. Molecules are a little bit like magnets. They attract each other. They go apart from each other. They also make sort of simple machines. And
try to wrap this up. Okay,
these simple machines are your RNA and DNA. They knit the proteins together. Those proteins are made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and little bits of other elements like iron, copper, calcium, the things you get in a vitamin pill. You don't need very much of those. One protein is pancreatin. It comes from pig pancreases. And its action, its motion, is that when you put it in water and you put it with your contact lenses, it chisels off the dirt on your contact lenses. Molecules are not just still things. They're always doing things, especially the organic ones that are little tiny like machines. A virus is a tiny bit of protein, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and the things that are in vitamin pills, surrounded by a layer of carbohydrates. That's that carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. It's a really, really, really simple life form, and whether you call it life or not is even a debatable thing, because all it can do is happen to bump into a very, very big object compared to it, a cell. But when it does, it shoves its genetic material into the cell. And if that's a single cell, like a bacterium, it doesn't always do bad things. That genetic material might just sit there as a non-harmful passenger, and that kind of virus is called a prophage. And what's just happened is your bacterium has just become a bacterium with some genetic material from an other kind of organism, but it now has the ability to make the proteins that the virus, because it was so primitive, couldn't make. They estimate that maybe as much as 90% of a human DNA is put there somewhere along the way when we were simpler organisms by viruses. That's one way that there can be a change that brings about a mutation. Another way that you can get a mutation is that when cells divide, and they're the sex cells, there's a point at which the chromosomes split into two groups. There are thin strands of proteins that pull the chromosomes apart from the middle. And if those chromosomes, which are kind of like floppy shoelaces, happen to be laying across each other, they don't get caught. They actually unhook on one side and rehook themselves together on the other side. But sometimes the ends, when that happens, sometimes it doesn't go through the other. Sometimes the tail ends get traded from those two chromosomes. So there's another place where a mutation can be introduced.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And
Manda, if I can cut you off here.
yeah.
I mean,
I want to thank you for taking my call, by the way.
Okay.
It's long. I know you have to continue your show.
Ma'am, she not only thinks about this stuff all the time, but you caught her on a day when she was way prepared to talk about this stuff.
Well, I'd like people to think of these molecules as moving, changing things and not little tinker toys that just sit there.
I understand.
Yeah,
That makes total sense to me.
It's all complicated, but it does boil down to physical processes, and that's not to minimize your emotional response to that tragic death of your grandmother, but that doesn't necessarily that emotional response isn't proof that there's something going on besides biology.
Okay.
So, but thanks for calling.
Well, thank you, and have a good day.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Whoa. And we got a bazillion callers. Let's just take them. Hello, Steve.
Yeah.
What can we do for you, Steve?
Oh, hi. Just want to tell you I really enjoy your show.
Thanks.
I've sort of been watching it a few times, and really like to see programs like this on TV. There's so much to talk about. I'll have to call back a few times just to cover all the points. And just in response to, I think maybe a previous caller, what I always say is I have nothing against Christians. I just never met one. I don't know if you've ever heard that one before. But anyway, what I was calling about is I consider myself a devout agnostic, and I use the term, obviously it's a pun, but if you could just sort of discuss what you think the difference is between agnostics and atheists. I mean, the way I consider it is I simply don't know ultimately. I'm not willing to basically have faith and stop at that. So I tend to be a rationalist and require evidence. But obviously we know there may be a limit, and probably is a limit to rational thought. So within that, I get a sort of sense of not being able to know everything, and therefore that is why I consider myself an agnostic and not an atheist, even though I find it highly unlikely that there is a God that is going to be managing our everyday life, or if there's even a God in the way that probably most people think of it. Yet I have a fundamental problem with understanding, like, where does matter come from, for instance, and the explanations of the Big Bang leave me somewhat troubled. So if you can just sort of discuss the difference between what you consider agnostics and atheists, and I'd love to listen to your response.
Well, I'd like to ask you one question.
Sure.
Do you believe in God?
No.
Then you're an atheist. That, to me, is the distinction.
But,
you are both an atheist and an agnostic.
Okay.
Because agnosticism is a statement about what you think is knowable.
Right.
But what you think the limits of knowledge are, or even of just the available evidence.
Right.
And atheism is a statement about whether you believe or not.
Well,
so, yeah.
I find it highly unlikely. I may have a little bit of doubt, and maybe and I don't want to say that I'm not, or or am. It's just it's just that little. I just simply can't know. So how is it?
Right.
That's where my quandary comes from.
Do you want to take this?
Well, I think that far too many people use the word agnostic because they're afraid to use the word atheist.
Mm-hmm.
It does have a very sour sound to it. I've been an atheist for years now, and I still look askance at the thought that I'm an atheist. I used to call myself an agnostic so I wouldn't have to say aloud that I was an atheist. I commend you for the honor of saying I don't know, because I don't know either.
Right. It's in the best interest of religion to portray atheism as an assertion that we know absolutely without a doubt that there isn't a God. Because, of course, that makes atheism difficult to defend.
Right. Very.
But if you ask self-professed atheists, most of them will say either, well, no, I can't prove without a doubt that gods don't exist, I just don't believe, or they will say, well, I think I can prove rationally without a doubt that the specific definitions of God that I have been presented with are nonsensical and do not exist. Even if there could conceivably be some new definition of God that would describe a thing that could exist.
Right.
Right, and then you get into stuff like the problem of evil. You know, how do you explain that there is evil in a world where we're supposed to have an omnipotent and omnibenevolent God?
Right.
Right. So
and why would he?
On that basis, atheists would reject specific definitions of gods. Right.
Yeah.
So, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Go ahead, Susan.
Oh, you should come to the bagel shop to meet some other atheists and agnostics. 10:30 today. 5th and Lavaca. Susan, we'd like to see you.
Okay. Well, I tend to run in very religious circles because of and it's always tough. But I have met and have very good friends that are atheists, and we have a great conversation. So,
Great.
All right. Well, thank you
Glad
very
to have
much,
that.
and
Thanks for
continue
calling.
on with your show. And if I can, I'd love to support you guys.
Well, thank you very much.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Okay. There we go. And that can't be right. We just had somebody on 2.
Steve on 2? Okay. Next
That
one is
must have been Steve.
Nancy on 3.
Okay. Hello, Nancy.
Hi.
Hi, what can we do for you?
Yeah, this is the first time I've seen this show, and you've probably gone over this question a million times. But what exactly do you believe in? I mean, do you believe that you yourself are a higher power, that you have control over everything, like your own destiny? Or it's a broad question, but...
Wow.
Did I stump
I
the
think
panel?
I think the broad answer to that broad question is no. I think that you'll find atheists think they're just people with the limited abilities that people have, facing the challenges that people face and doing as well as they can.
You have control over your own destiny.
Well, I don't think that necessarily follows from what I just said. I mean, can we do stuff like make ourselves win the lottery? Well, no.
Well, yeah,
we wouldn't
of course.
claim a thing like that. We would claim that, we can try to do stuff and sometimes we will succeed as well as anybody else can.
And where do you think we came from? Is her point we came from just like an inert gas, or just like along the way from a molecule to...
The evidence appears to be that life arose through natural processes.
Okay. And personally, yes, I do believe in God. And how do you feel about people that go to church or even pray in the shower, whatever, that do believe? What is your feeling? Do you think we're foolish, or?
I don't think that much about that at all. I mean, I believe that everybody's entitled to your own opinion.
Well, I was just saying, even if I indeed am wrong, and when all is said and done, I was doing this for naught. I don't think people leading a life like that it's hurting them or anybody else. It's making them feel good. It's giving them somebody to, maybe even just somebody to talk to when they get a problem.
Well,
and they believe that person, or that being, I should say, is listening.
Right. No, when we don't deny the emotional appeal of that belief. I mean, we recognize it, and sometimes we look at that and say, boy, it would be nice if we felt that way, if we had that to turn to. But
well, I think
in general, huh?
I think that's the difference between you and me, is I can't myself call God down from the heavens to slap me across the face and say, yes, I'm here, but I do believe he is.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Like I said to the last caller, I mean, we don't make it our business to tell other people what to believe, but if you ask us our opinion, and it's always tough in a show like this, when we try to explain our view of things and justify that view, that's automatically going to be contrary to what a lot of believers believe. And we're not doing it because we're trying to tell you what to believe. We're doing it because we're trying to get you to understand what we believe. And we're trying to get other atheists to recognize that they're not bad people for believing this way. But you asked our opinion about believers, and I think it boils down again to what I said to the last caller. We just kind of think it's bad policy to believe in stuff for which there is no evidence. And once you start doing that, there's a lot of much more hazardous things that you can fall into besides just, believing in a God and maybe praying in the shower. We have Ray? Is that our Ray? Hello, Ray?
Hey, how are you doing?
Hi.
Ray.
You're a different Ray. What can we do for you, Ray?
Well, I just got a question. I've been privileged to the inner circle as far as government stuff, and what I've heard, I wanted to see if y'all have heard anything. Apparently, archaeologists have uncovered something that's supposed to disprove the Bible as far as the origins of mankind. However, they won't release this until after the year. Supposedly, when the Christians hear this, they're going to go crazy and try to uprise against the government. That's why they've been trying to get all this Delta Force and all this kind of stuff together. And they're going to consider these Christians terrorists because they're going to be doing terrorist things because they're not going to want to believe what has been found out.
We're not real big on conspiracy theories.
That's not a conspiracy theory. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's going to happen.
Well,
until there's
until
evidence,
it has happened,
good evidence,
until it has happened,
it's still a theory.
Yeah,
and it is about a conspiracy.
I understand.
The government hiding something. That's a conspiracy.
Where you're coming from. I understand where you're coming from.
Certainly, we have evidence of Christians going terrorist in order to get their way.
Right.
So that's not hard to believe.
Right. I have one more thing to say.
But it's real hard. You'll find that it's really, really hard to get scientists, the scientific community, to sit on discoveries like that. Awesomely hard. Okay? Like to the point where I find it really difficult to believe that you could get the people that uncovered this evidence, whatever it is, to be quiet about it.
Well, they're being quiet about it.
On our list for
Oh yeah. Do you got
future things?
any?
Okay.
Can you give us any references to back this up? We'll look into it.
The person, I cannot tell you the person's name that's in the government that I got.
Well, we're kind of stuck then. We're not going to believe that until there's the evidence.
I understand what you're saying until it happens. I understand. Yeah. Also, I wanted to say something else. I was listening to a radio show the other day about these Christians were calling in saying that they believe that life begins when you're just a bacteria. And it was so funny because they were contradicting themselves. They were talking about,
when we're a bacteria? When are we ever a bacteria?
That's what they were saying.
Huh.
4 billion years ago?
Yeah, that's what
Wait, that's evolution.
That's what I was trying to say. If they believe that, then they're contradicting themselves. They were talking about abortion and stuff. They were believing that when you're just cells or whatever in the woman's womb, that you're that's the beginning of life. Because supposedly this doctor has an office and has these sperm in there, and he doesn't know what to do with them because people won't claim them, so he's just going to destroy them, and all these Christians are having a hard time with that. They're saying it's murder and everything.
Has he tried eBay?
So they're saying that those are lies, and if they believe that, then they have to believe evolution, because they're saying, if they believe that life begins when, the bacteria or whatever, or cells or whatever, then they have to believe in evolution, because that's what happened.
Well...
so they're contradicting themselves.
I can't respond to your description of what they said, but in my experience, you will find a lot of contradictions among creationists, because you pretty much wind up contradicting yourself if you try to make a case in favor of something that's just wrong.
Is they kept contradicting themselves.
Yeah.
Well, that's one thing that we hope to find is answers to ethical questions that are independent of religions, because whether or not religious people come to see things our way or not, they do have to come to see things each other's way. They do have to come to a consensus. All human beings are going to have to decide what is a life. What is something that you can't kill with impunity? What is something you can't take out of the freezer and let it thaw and die?
But thanks for your call.
All right, buddy.
Every sperm is great. If a sperm is wasted, God gets quite irate.
Thank you, Arlo. That was apropos. Let's talk to Alan.
Good morning, Jeff, ladies.
Morning, Alan.
Hello.
I tell you, I've never watched your show before, but I find it very refreshing, your approach to things. And I had a question.
Okay.
In the atheist point of view, is there any distinction between what the Christians call a God and indeed a creator?
Well, you could certainly come up with descriptions of a God and descriptions of a creator that would be different things.
Right, but as an atheist, do you distinguish between a God that is monitoring everybody and running the show, or a power or an entity who actually set things in motion and was responsible for creation and evolution, etc.?
We still don't have anything near to a agreed upon definition of God. We've had people call in and they say that whatever made us, that's God, and they've made the definition after the fact.
But isn't there a difference between a God and indeed a creator who's responsible for creation?
There could be. If you're asking whether it's possible to be an atheist and believe in a thing called a creator but not believe in a thing called a God?
Yes.
That's a deist.
That might be a deist. There are different flavors of deism too.
Because we have evidence of a creator. I mean,
we do?
All you have to do is wake up in the morning and look around.
No, I'm afraid
That's
not.
evidence of existence. That's not evidence of creation. Creation implies very strongly
of a creator,
being, a being that cares, a being that thinks. We have no evidence of something creating us that thinks or cares about us. To the contrary, we have nature. We know nature is there, and what little we know of nature, which is very, very large, is that nature doesn't really care very much about us.
Right,
if it had an ability to care.
So atheists don't necessarily look at the universe and the order and all that, and in fact, we do have a creation. Y'all don't necessarily, therefore, believe that at one time there was a creator who started everything in motion.
We see no evidence of that.
There's
no
good evidence.
And tell me about your meeting this morning. Where it's at 5th and Lavaca?
Yeah. We want to point out that is not an invitation for Christians to come down and attempt to convert us.
Yeah, I'm not a Christian.
We don't do that.
No, that's not my intention. And how many people are in your group?
Oh gosh, at last I heard
60 at least.
60. That's paid members, and then quite a few hangers-ons.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one last question, real quickly. How did the Christians get around the obvious existence of evolution?
How do they get around it?
Yeah, how do they, I mean, you have the skeletal records starting with Lucy in Ethiopia and on up. How do they shun that? How do they not address it?
I think that there's reformation going on unofficially, not coming from clergy, but coming from lay people who, in order to rationalize this to themselves, more and more get away from a literal belief in Jesus to a non-literal idealistic belief that to a lot of Christians, a lot of modern American Christians, believing in Jesus and having Jesus in your heart means taking this personality from a book and respecting that personality, emulating that personality, and trying to live in accordance with that personality's ideals.
And to heck with all the evidence of evolution.
No, a lot of Christians don't see any dichotomy between believing
evolution
in Jesus and having evolution.
Yeah, not all Christians are creationists. In fact, quite a very small percentage of them are. You know, I don't know. I don't think we're gonna feel comfortable here trying to make the case for creationism, because you know, that's for creationists to do. You'd have to ask them.
Right. All right, guys. I sure appreciate it.
Thanks for calling. And come on, there we go. We got Jim. Hello, Jim.
Yes.
What can we do for you?
Yes, I missed your earlier comment. I had just tuned in about that scientist or somebody had found something to disprove the Bible.
Yeah, we don't know what that was all about.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Coming from a Christian viewpoint, where is it do you feel like that the Bible cannot be proved scientifically?
Where is it that we think the Bible cannot be proved?
Where is your source of evidence that the Bible cannot be proved?
What do you mean? What about the Bible are we talking about?
Okay, well, the creation, the flood, the fact that the flood was universal.
The flood was universal?
Yes, it was.
The entire universe flooded?
Yes, there is evidences that the world being flooded at one time or another.
No, you just went from universe, which is everything, to world, which is just the earth.
Correct. But do you?
Okay. You're gonna have to like pin down what it is you're talking about, or we can't really respond.
Okay. Do you believe that science and the Bible cannot be reconciled?
I believe they can, because the Bible has so many contradictions. Like the account of Jesus' birth has different accounts. There's lots of contradictions between different books of the New Testament. They just don't jibe with each other. It's very hard to give something credibility when it's not even consistent.
Okay, could you specifically just point out one or two contradictions of the New Testament?
Anybody in the audience here on crew? Yeah. Contradictions?
What do we got? Come on, camera.
Okay.
We got a guy here who's prepared to answer your question.
Okay. Yeah.
Just give us one. One what?
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. You talk about contradictions in the New Testament. We'll start off.
Can we get the camera? Get a camera on him. There we go.
You start off with the contradictions in the New Testament. Start off with one. They can't decide whether the Hijrah occurred or not, where he ran to Egypt. They can't get his place of birth right. They can't get where he lived right. There are at least 20 or 30 major contradictions in the resurrection story. Was it 2 days or 3 days? Were the guards there when or not? The Romans would have executed those guards on the spot for sleeping. Not a single guard would have been left alive. It would have been a very bad death. So none of the story makes any sense when you talk about that.
Okay.
But well, thank you. But the fact is that even John's gospel proves that, during the resurrection, that the soldiers were paid off. The soldiers were paid to keep quiet about his resurrection. Jesus in the Bible was seen by over 500 witnesses after his resurrection. And as far as
and where are these witnesses, and where are the accounts outside of the Bible that it's all true?
Outside the Bible?
Yeah.
Independent confirmation is very important. Something becomes more credible when it doesn't just come from one source with something to gain from telling it their way.
Yeah, there's a big problem in that there's like a
Josephus, even the early church historian Josephus.
Josephus is widely known by biblical scholars to be a forgery. That chapter. There are later Christian scholars who do not mention the passage in Josephus that's supposed to refer to Christ. And the reason is that passage wasn't there yet. It was a later Christian scholar, one who is on record saying it's okay to lie to pass on belief in the church, who put that passage in there.
Well, I have read Josephus many times in his works, and I have never found out that he was considered forgery.
Yeah, you might want to read something other than religious apologetics. Okay. You might want to read some of the criticism of that apologetics, and not just limit yourself to what your fellow Christians are saying. Because it's in their best interest to believe.
Well, I just got one comment, and I'll hang up, and I appreciate you letting me call.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
I was always looking for independent confirmation of Herod's slaughter of the innocents. That's such a horrible thing that you would have thought Josephus would have mentioned it, because he mentioned a lot of things about Herod's life. So could you give me a source on that?
Well, Josephus is not to prove the Bible. Josephus complements the historicity of the Bible. And so the fact is that Josephus is still a human being who would be prone to any kind of error, but I'm talking about like the gentleman that stood up on...
He's not prone to reappearing hundreds of years after his own death to add new passages so he can mention Jesus.
Well, I understand your point on that, but let me say this, that the Gospels, there's Synoptic Gospels, there's 3 of the Synoptic Gospels have slightly different accounts, but they all have the same principle in the thrust of their truth, that Jesus was born of a virgin, that he was, put on a cross, and he did die, and he was buried part of 3 days.
But you can get that same kind of similarity from 3 different comic books that tell the story of Superman's origin.
Well,
the problem is that books, anybody can write down stories, and anybody can retell the same story and get some elements the same and some elements different.
But even the fact that
somebody writes stuff down is not proof of anything.
But the Bible has
Not in
been
and of
preserved
itself.
for years, even the Dead Sea Scrolls. Do you not think the Holy Spirit could preserve
I have a hard time believing that
Holy
the Holy
Spirit
would
did not
let
have to
3
preserve the
different
Dead Sea
things
Scrolls. The
come
Dead Sea Scrolls were in caves in a desert.
But they still proved the biblical writings, some of them.
That's not proof. That's a piece of evidence, and it's not very good evidence.
Okay, well, my last comment was this. Is it inconceivable to your organization that there is a God who loves you and who realizes the sinfulness of human beings and decided to give his own son as a sacrifice because he is a holy and a righteous God, and he doesn't want to see people perish, but he did give his son Christ Jesus so he could pay for our sins? Is that inconceivable to you?
Let her...
Not based on proof.
Okay.
And I realize
Somebody
there's a lot
take
of
it, I don't care.
I realize there's a lot of Christians
Well,
out there who do not
Okay,
live.
you were talking at first about the Gospels agreeing in principle. Well, these men did everything but sleep and have sex with this guy, and guess what? They can't agree on his life history.
That's not true. Give me a reference.
Well, what about the time he was in the grave? They has no clear consequence on when he was in the grave. What about the words he said at the
He was
last
in the
part?
great part of 3 days.
Wait a minute, my friend. The three don't agree in major parts. They don't have all the same stories, and yet these men did everything but sleep and have sex with him.
I find no major differences in the Gospels of Matthew,
Check.
Mark, Luke, or John. There's no differences.
Okay. You asked a question, which is, do we find it inconceivable? First of all, the organization doesn't have an opinion. Okay. We're a collection of... I'm sorry, I've got my own.
Okay, then I'll direct it towards
We're an organization of individual atheists. Okay. And speaking for myself, no, I don't find it inconceivable any more than I find Superman inconceivable. I can conceive of Superman. That doesn't make him exist.
Okay.
And is not grounds for me to believe in him.
Okay, in Genesis 1:1, where it says, in the beginning God created, there is a scientific word in the Hebrew language that scientists use called bara.
A scientific word.
It's a scientific word.
Aren't you aware that science as a way of looking at things wasn't around at that time?
Okay, if you study the etymology of the word, scientist, evolutionist, even would agree with the definition and the working function of the word, because bara means God created something out of nothing. There has to be a pre-existing matter for creation to take place. God took something out of nothing. He spoke the world.
We understand that is the assertion of the Bible. Yes.
Right, but that's also a scientific word, bara, which literally...
it cannot be a scientific word, since science was not a thing that was done at that time. Science was not a way of looking at things.
Yeah.
That's the philosophy of science came about much, much, much later.
So obviously, though, that y'all would not, obviously with the Bible not being a reliable source of truth from your perspective, there's no literal heaven and there'd be no literal hell, correct?
That would be correct.
Okay. Well...
Thanks for calling.
I disagree, but...
Yeah, you're free to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right.
And thank you for waiting, people who are still calling here.
All right.
Being real patient.
Let's talk to Solcar.
Hello. Shalom.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Yes. Can you please prove to me that Hashem, or God, as you call him, does not exist?
Nope. Can't do it.
I can't.
But if you want to give us a specific definition of the characteristics of Hashem or God, we'll be happy to think about that and tell you whether we think that is likely that a thing like that exists or not, based on the evidence.
Oh, the evidence. Okay. Well, I need to have some cappuccino, and then I can think about it. Shalom.
Well, we're here till 10:30, so if you can call back, feel free.
Okay, shalom.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Peace to you, too.
And... Ty?
Yes.
Hi,
the gentleman that just called before,
yeah,
he was asking if we could conceive of this whole deal. And what I find most curious about these people is that they say this omnipotent, loving God gave his only son to us.
Yeah.
So I don't get this. He let his son die so we could be forgiven of our sins.
Yeah. Right?
This doesn't make sense.
I'll admit to you right now, I'm as puzzled as you.
Why even send a son? Why not just say, well, okay, I forgive you, we'll start over again?
What's the sacrifice?
I don't get it.
if you have a child and the child goes through, a couple of days of horrifying pain, and then, he's going to live eternity forever in bliss at your right hand in heaven, Not much of a sacrifice. There are human beings who have endured a lot more pain for a lot longer period of time than that. And this whole, saving us from our sins, okay, what is that? Well, that's about the eating of the apple in the Garden of Eden, which is supposed to have, introduced sin to humanity, where if we have an omniscient God, that God could not possibly have failed to know in advance that that's exactly what was going to happen.
Right.
And if he didn't want us to have sin, he shouldn't have put the tree there, So it's just utter nonsense. Or he should have showed up. He should have smacked the snake around. There's all kinds of things he could have done, and then explain to me why between the time when supposedly Eve eats the fruit, right, and hundreds or thousands of years go by before God suddenly goes, I know, I can do this trick with the sun to save them from their sins. Why didn't he do it you know what? Hey, Eve, you're pregnant.
Yeah.
It's my son. And then have something horrifying happen to the son and fix it right there in the space of, just a few years. No, it takes this omnipotent, omniscient God who knows everything and can do everything hundreds or thousands of years to get around to coming up with this lame plan to save humanity from its sins. Makes no sense.
And they always say how loving God is. And I think about Job. I just read Job not too long ago, and if I was a Christian, it would scare me, because I wouldn't want God to be bored and say, hey, look, there's Ty, see what you can do with him. And the devil would go, all right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it.
Thanks for calling.
Mike and Mike Prime.
And we're doing one mic before the other mic. Hello, Mike.
Hello. Hi, I wanted to call out, just to preface, I do believe in God. I was raised a Catholic.
Okay.
However, what disturbs me is that the other people that are calling up that are trying to present our argument for the existence of God, they're quoting the Bible. Let's realize, when were these books written? Okay, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, which are the first 5 books of the Bible. The Jews also refer to them as the Torah, right? Okay, let's get that. Realize that these were written during the Babylonian captivity, which took place around the 6th century BC. As far as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were concerned, they weren't even around. So let's cut to the chase. As far, anybody out there who's listening who is a Christian, stop quoting the Bible as, using quotes in the Bible to prove the existence of God. Even with the Gospels are concerned, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, none of them were contemporaries of Jesus. The Gospel of John itself was written on the island of Cyprus approximately 100 A.D. Now, you try and tell me a story about someone that lived 100 years ago and try and get it right. You're not going to do it. Where you have to go to, I believe, for those of us who are Christians, are believers, we have to go to other sources. We can't sit there and quote the Bible and expect someone of your point of view, an atheist, to believe us. It's ludicrous.
Are you suggesting that you have a source you can refer to that will change our minds?
Well, yeah. I mean, when you're talking about, okay, you're saying it's ludicrous that God would give His only Son and let Him suffer and everything, instead of just saying, okay, well, here, I'll just correct everything. Think of it in terms of human beings. Okay, if you have a child, and you want your child to grow up good, you can tell them every lesson that ever learned, that every experience that you ever learned, but unless that kid falls and skins its knee sometimes, it's not going to learn to look down at the ground.
And that's because of the way that human beings are.
Yeah.
And if there is a God that designed and created human beings, that God is responsible for the way that the human beings are.
True.
So if that God wanted to make us beings who could have children who, when told what to do, would never forget and not have to skin their knee first, then theoretically that God should have been able to make that kind of human beings. But
then
we
wouldn't be human. To be
well,
human,
we'd be some other kind of being, and that would be perfectly content with what it was.
To be human is to be fallible. If He was going to make us on His level, we would all be deities. We would not be human beings.
Yeah.
You see, and because we are human beings, because we are fallible, and because we are basically ignorant, unless we fall down and skin our knees,
and
that's when you're going to learn the lesson.
Why are we all those things? According to the idea that God created humanity, we're all those things because that God made us be all those things.
Unfortunately, just because something makes sense doesn't make it true.
Well,
you
I
can
would argue in this case that it doesn't make sense.
I'm just trying to explain the point of view that why this almighty being would create a son and let him suffer. I'm trying to explain that that's why you let him suffer. If you have a child, that child is going to have to suffer through certain things in order to fully learn them. You can impart all the knowledge you want to a kid, but it ain't going to matter what he'll be.
Omnipotent. If you're omnipotent, you create a son that already has that knowledge.
Well, it's not just
There's no point to going through all this rigmarole.
Then you wouldn't be human.
It's nonsensical.
It's
you
not
wouldn't
just
be human.
that.
You'd be some other kind of creature.
We're not permitted.
You're suggesting... Okay.
We're not permitted to pay for our own sins. We, the children, are being absolved of our sins. I never had any free will. Presuming that Christianity and salvation are true, I never had the free will choice to say, yes, you may die for my sins. They're my sins. If it were my child should be punished for my child's sins. Dying for my sins is the most amazing, poignant story to me, but it's like somebody painting my house and then charging me for it. I'm not obliged to pay somebody when I didn't ask them to do that.
No, you didn't
I
ask
find that
them.
repulsive, that attitude of taking your children and then, putting a moral debt on their heads that they certainly didn't request. They certainly didn't okay it.
So if you didn't request it, what's the big deal? You're exercising your free will by choosing to decide that, no, there is no higher being. So you are using that free will that they have given. You're not obligated.
As well as reason.
You're not obligated to believe it. I mean, this is a free country, and that's the beauty of America. You can believe what you believe, and we can believe what we believe, but you are exercising your free will by not believing.
And reason.
There's a whole separate issue concerning free will that we could get into, but I'd rather keep at the current topic, which is, the whole Jesus' sacrifice thing. And again, you say that, well, then you'd have a being that would be something that was not human. Human beings are supposed to have been created, and this God of yours is supposed to be omnipotent. Are you telling me that this omnipotent God of yours cannot create a human being with the memories of horrifying torments that he didn't have to actually endure?
Well, here's what.
When you say omnipotent, if you believe that your God is omnipotent, that's all possible conceivable things that God could be able to do, including making a son who had all the experiences of a human being, all the important stuff, at a snap of his fingers, and not have to go through this weird ritual of raising him up on Earth and having him tortured and killed by human beings. Okay. It's just creepy.
Sure. Okay, I could appreciate that. But here's an idea for you to think about. All right, now you say, why can't this omnipotent being create something that's an equivalent of his own? Let's talk about that in a sense of something that we do know, human existence. Uh-huh. We do have artificial intelligence, but we as human beings are still not good enough. No matter how good we are, we cannot create anything that's even close, even remotely in the ballpark with what human beings can do. Now think about it that way. Now, if we can't even create artificial intelligence with as advanced as we are, who's to say that, well, perhaps, this omnipotent being, he might be all-powerful. Okay. Perhaps maybe he does have a shortcoming. Maybe he can't create something that is an equivalent to himself. And then again, why would he want to create something that is an equivalent to himself?
I don't know where we suddenly got to something equivalent to himself. I mean, is Jesus equivalent to God? Is that what you're saying?
No,
I don't know which
Jesus,
particular branch of Christianity
Jesus
you're talking to us about.
Jesus had a double existence. He was part man, part divine.
Okay, so couldn't God create a thing that was part man and part divine? That wouldn't be equivalent to him. It would be something lesser than him.
Hercules.
So I don't understand your point. And secondly, you're going to be in trouble with that argument in 25 years or so, which is projected as the time when we're going to have powerful enough computers to have real artificial intelligence.
That's a scary thought.
This is not an eternal obstacle. This is something that we're working to overcome and eventually will.
Then again,
have trouble with that argument of yours.
In the area of artificial intelligence, personally, I don't think that we should create something that is an equivalent of a human being, because then you're creating something that can eventually take over and hurt what human beings have worked so hard to create.
Well,
so same thing on a divine level. God, all-knowing, knows that if he created something that is an equivalent to him or can challenge him, this other thing might eventually take him over.
Yeah, I don't know why you're keeping on that point. I don't understand how that relates to the discussion we were having about Jesus and his supposed sacrifice.
And the sacrifice that Jesus made, that was by teaching by example, is what his lessons are supposed to do.
Okay. Okay, fine. I don't understand why an omnipotent God who wants his creatures to know stuff has to resort to this crude teaching by example. I don't understand. But thanks for your call.
Understand it the same way a parent does to a child.
A parent is not omnipotent. That's the problem.
I'm trying to relate it to something that you might understand.
But relating it to understand misses the relating it to something that is nothing like a god misses the point.
See, I think there's your problem. You're refusing to understand.
No,
I'm trying to relate this to something that you could understand.
I'm saying your analogy is hopelessly flawed, because if you say God couldn't do this because here's a thing that human beings can't do, human beings are nothing like gods.
I'm not saying God couldn't do it. I said God chose to do it that way. The same way you would raise your child.
Why?
Parents that want their children to learn will not protect them from everything out there. It will let them fall.
Thanks for your call. Bye-bye.
I love people trying to justify the excuse of humanity, because what's funny is multiple times in the Bible, God admits that it was a big mistake to create humanity, which I think is just absurd.
Okay.
Whoops.
He didn't know it was going to be a mistake before he did it?
Yeah, there's omniscience and stuff in there too. It just makes you can't. You can't justify it like that. If God is supposed to be something that's so much more powerful and all-knowing and all-powerful and all-loving and all-everything, you can't justify what he does by saying, well, look, here's what human beings have to do. He would be a completely different kind of being with all kinds of power to do whatever the heck he wanted. And then it comes down to, well, what does it appear that God wants? What it appears that God wants, if he's omnipotent and omniscient, and this is what we got, it appears that what he wants is a horrifyingly nasty existence for his little creatures. And, that's another reason to have a problem with God. Hello, Mike.
Yeah, how you doing?
Sorry you had to wait that long.
Oh, that's okay.
Thanks for staying on the line. What can we do for you?
Hey, I just wanted to go back to the beginning real quick. I mean, do you all believe in evolution?
Believe in?
Yeah.
Most atheists prefer to avoid that word believe because it implies a certainty that would fly in the face of any possible evidence that could ever arise in future. I think that what you'll find is most atheists would prefer to say that the evidence right now seems to support evolution and not any of the alternatives.
Okay. Well, now I'm a Christian, but I'm not going to start out with, Jesus and all that stuff. I'm just going to
get there eventually?
I'm going to start out just with what I contemplated. Okay, now I started thinking about evolution.
Yeah.
And, this is a long time ago, and it just came to me, that, they say that everything got started because of the Big Bang, right? I mean, there was gases formed, and there was a Big Bang, and then everything, all life came from...
Gases would have been formed some point after the Big Bang, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, what I'm trying to say is, in the beginning, there was nothing. What created the Big Bang?
Even that's up to debate. The idea that there was nothing before the Big Bang, some physicists are proponents of that theory. Some physicists are not. Some physicists believe that it's a cycle.
But they're okay now. So you're saying that there was never there was never totally nothing.
Well,
I mean, where did the
when you say
things
never,
come
here's
from?
the problem.
Where did the gases and the stuff like that come from?
As I understand it, one of the prevailing views of the formation of the universe from Stephen Hawking is this model where time and matter come into existence at the same time. Okay, which I'm using the word time two different ways there. Excuse me, it's the limitations of the language.
So where did time and matter come
which would mean that the question, huh?
I said, where did time and matter come from?
Now wait a minute. What that model does is it makes meaningless the question of, well, what existed before the universe? Because there is no before the universe. The universe is and matter, the matter of the universe and the time in which that matter was existing happened together. Okay, so there can't be time before there is the matter of the universe in which there could be some cause for the appearance of that matter. And the explanation for where the matter came from is, as I understand it, and I'm not a physicist, so this is my limited understanding, quantum fluctuations, which are known to occur, that there's like stuff getting created and destroyed all the time.
Yeah, but see, where did the fluctuations and the stuff come from?
Good question. Good question.
Okay, now let me go on with my opinion real quick here.
At some point, you're going to get to the limits of human knowledge, and that's probably always going to be true. There's probably always going to be stuff that we cannot know or don't know yet. But
Well, see, the big thing with me is this, was, okay, I started thinking, okay, now, if all life, the way that I've heard evolution or whatever, if all life came from one cell, you know, why are there so many, you know, different plants and animals and species of animals and fish and insects and,
this is an excellent,
you know, all that stuff.
Thanks
and,
for, excuse me, sir?
Yeah.
If I could cut you off there, thanks for raising this topic. Manda came here with all this stuff prepared to talk about this exact subject, and she got started early in response to an earlier caller, but we told her that about this time in the show, we would turn it over to her and let her give her whole thing. So she's going to talk about where that diversity came from.
Okay. Can I say a little bit more real quick?
Sure.
Okay. Now, you know, to me, that idea of just one cell, you know, or, you know, creating all the, you know, species of life on this planet, you know, male and female even. And then there's that link of where, you know, they say we came out of the ocean and we came from apes and all that stuff. Yeah. Well, there's still fish, there's still apes, and where is that? Shouldn't there, if there's still apes and there's man, you know, has come to where we are now, where wouldn't, if there's still apes, then how come that link between man and ape isn't still around?
Because
you know what I mean.
I'll answer that point and then turn it over to Amanda. Thanks for your call. The reason why there are still other life forms that are considered ancestors to other existing life forms is that evolution is not a thing that happens simultaneously across an entire species. The reason why a population, I mean, if you have like gazelles and they have a certain coloration, the reason that they are able to exist and succeed with that particular coloration in the environment that they're in is because they are suited to that environment. But if a gazelle herd gets separated and you get a separate population living in a different region and the climate changes over there, those gazelles, not all of them, just those, are under different selection pressures and can diverge over time from the original species that they came from. But that doesn't require the extinction of the original species. Sometimes an entire species will change at once if they're all together and all still interbreeding and stuff, but sometimes you'll get them separated and going in different paths. Go ahead, Manda.
All right. We get this question of where did all the diversity come from? How could this have happened?
Thank you.
I went back to my textbooks on genetics and things like that, and I looked up, well, first I started with ways that mutations could happen and found out there were quite a few ways that non-lethal mutations could happen, and it seemed like any species with a slot for ways to diverge, for example, sexual reproduction, where the children are variations on each other, on the parents, those creatures have an advantage over the creatures that are relatively perfect copies of their parents. So with amoebas, that one-celled animal, one way an amoeba can reproduce is by splitting in half. But then you only get two amoebas that, unless a very rare event takes place, are probably still going to look like amoebas. They may have slightly different proteins. They may have slightly different sensory abilities. What amoebas can do, amoebas have something very analogous to smell. They are attracted by certain molecules. What amoebas as a lineage can also do is they conjugate. That means two amoebas of the same general kind come to each other, they touch pseudopods, each one reproduces its own genetic material, and then, keeping a copy of their original material, they also trade a copy so that the new one has twice the information that it had before. This doesn't seem like much of a gain, but it is a gain in the long term because the two amoebas that actually do this are the two survivors. Unlike with the mammalian genetics, where a change might or might not take over the rest of the species, for example, a zebra with a big nose, you might get every zebra out there after a few generations having a big nose, or you might just get a handful of them. But at the bacterial level, because of this conjugation, a change takes place sideways much faster than it would with sexual reproduction. Amoebas also have sexual reproduction, where an amoeba makes a sperm-like motile little creature. You want to think of life, how strange life is. I told you earlier that molecules and atoms are maybe better thought of as moving machines that are pushing on each other and springing apart and causing each other to go towards each other and spring apart. Think on yourself as the union of an egg and a sperm. At one point, you were two different organisms. One of them could swim. One of them just sat there. And those two were equally alive. They were both alive, and they combined to make you. For people who believe in a soul, this is a real chaotic thing to figure out. Was the soul in the sperm? Was the soul in the egg? Do sperms and eggs have half a soul? Where did sperms and eggs come from? Well, we go back to the amoebas, and we have one amoeba that was a big troublemaker on the East Coast. It's called Pfiesteria, P-F-E-I-S-T-E-R-I-A. If you do a web search from it, you'll get a very, very strange tale of how on the Atlantic coast, thousands and thousands of menhaden, they're a smelt, started dying. And they had sores on their bodies. It was like a biblical plague. Why are these fish dying? They investigated it. Some of the sores on the fish were so bad that it looked like somebody had grabbed the herring and taken a bite out of it. These poor fish. And they were dying in droves. There were football-sized fields a foot deep of a fish about this big. That's a lot of smelts. So they took some of these and they cultured them. Well, they took them to a lab and did smears and saw if anything was on the fish growing. And all they found was an amoeba. And certainly not the kind of thing that could kill a fish. But they kept culturing the amoebas and discovered that this particular amoeba, Pfiesteria piscidida, I think it's how it's pronounced, had a different form. The form was called a star amoeba, and instead of just being a blob, it had a somewhat harder center and pseudopods in a regular kind of a star pattern. And that this particular one was attracted to fish, and that this second form would give off a toxin. The scientists who were working on this early on had no idea that this toxin could be carried in the air. And in one of the labs, they abandoned the lab, and a scientist who was on the original project went back to it and found the culture had gotten free. It was growing on the walls. So he thought, oh, this is gross. I think I'll clean it off. After about 20 minutes in the lab, his legs were paralyzed. His breathing was very, very, very difficult. His vision was blurry, and he was vomiting. And he struggled out of there, you know, crawling with his arms. And the toxin is pretty dangerous. We've got proteins making poisons. That's what happened to the fish. The fish were paralyzed by this. The toxins ate through the fish, and the amoeba form came back. And this is a diagram of its life cycle. This is not an ecosystem. This is all the different forms that this one amoeba can be. It's not an amoeba. It's also a trochophore. A trochophore looks kind of like a basketball with a little round skirt like the belt of Saturn, and one tail in back and two tails in the front. And we also have here a cyst. Now a cyst is a bundle of cells. Here we have a form of amoeba that a whole bunch of cells are all clustered very tightly together. The purpose of a cyst, the apparent purpose, is when the water is very difficult for the amoebas to survive, the amoeba clones itself off, so to speak, and makes something like a raspberry of cells. So here we have a reason for something to be multicellular that has nothing to do with being colonial. It just has to do with being a physical object somewhat larger than the amoeba. All these forms came not from one amoeba. Presumably, it could be that different lineages of amoebas hit upon different mutations, but then, got together, conjugated, and throughout the population, the little tricks that the individual lineages had were shared. And so now we have an organism with 24 different ways to be.
Okay.
So that's how you can get diversity at the level of an amoeba.
Any questions? That was awesome. I didn't realize how much material you had, and thanks very much for fitting that into the available time.
Anybody.
Let's take more calls. Michelle.
Yes.
What can we do for you, Michelle?
Well, I've got a couple of questions and comments.
Okay.
First of all, I want to know who Ethan Hawking is. Stephen Hawking.
Stephen Hawking, physicist.
Okay.
You'll recognize him as the guy with the electronic voice who's confined to a wheelchair because he's got
multiple sclerosis.
Multiple sclerosis? Yeah.
Okay, and do y'all believe that everything that he says is fact?
Oh, no.
Because earlier y'all had a call that was debating whether the Bible's writers were in truth, factual.
Okay, yeah, I'll explain that. He is a trained physicist. He is alive now. He responds to people's questions about his theories, and he works with other physicists, and their ideas are in competition, and the ones that fit the available evidence the best are the ones that physicists gravitate towards.
I see. Are you presenting your viewpoints as fact?
Depends which
or
viewpoints.
Opinion?
It depends which viewpoints you're talking about.
Well, the fact that there is no God, is that a fact or is that an opinion?
It is an opinion based on the available evidence.
Okay. So those of us who believe that there is a God, we can base our opinion on available evidence too.
You can, but then the thing that has to happen is that the two differing opinions have to get together and talk about, well, what is that evidence and what is the justification for relying on the individual pieces of evidence, and then, figure out what really is the best point of view.
Okay. Well,
I mean, if you care about humanity moving toward a better and better understanding of what's going on.
Well, I do believe in humanity moving towards a better understanding of what's going on, but I believe that better understanding comes straight from the Word of God.
Well, see, then what you're doing is you are assuming that the answer is God before bothering to go through the process of examining the evidence.
I have examined the evidence.
But
I have faith that the Bible is true.
What I mean is the process where you get together with other people of differing points of view and you discuss how relevant the various pieces of evidence are.
Well, the relative
if you go into that discussion saying, well, but I presume that it all comes down to this God, well, you're walking into a discussion that should be open and talking about all the different points of view with a prejudice.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Can you prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that there is no God?
No. Not universally, no. But if you give us a particular definition of God, we can respond to that particular definition. For example, there is a problem, there's a thing called the problem of evil, which is a refutation of any definition of God that has him be both omnipotent and omnibenevolent. Because a God who is all-powerful and all-loving